now we're going to switch gears here to the next portion of our agenda, which is starting off in a very important way, talking about the use of social media in research and the ways in which social media can impact the regulatory environment. And I'd like to invite up our panelists here. And this is great. This portion of the event, I get to take a seat along with them. We have Cecilia Arandaza from Faster Cures and Paul Bove of the Food and Drug Administration joining us here to like research. Have a seat. So first of all, I want to welcome you guys, and thank you both for coming. Hey, Paul, nice to see you.
Good to see you as well.
Just in under the gun there, joining us right as the clock struck 10.
No, I've been here since 9:30, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sitting right there listening in.
To it.
Excellent. And Cecilia, welcome. So first, I want to give both of you an opportunity to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your organizations and your roles within them. So Cecilia, we'll start with you.
Sure. First of all, good morning, everyone. And Seth, thank you so much for organizing this really important discussion. I'm Cecilia Arandaza. I head communications and policy for an organization called Faster Cures. We are a center of the Milken Institute. We're based in Washington, and we work across diseases and with all the different sectors in the medical research and development ecosystem to really try and figure out what's standing in the way of medical progress. We all know that there's just tremendous scientific advances, there's technology at our fingertips, and yet it takes 15 years, upwards of $1 billion, and the risks are just super high when you're looking at exactly how to translate an idea into a medical therapy that can save lives. And so that's what our focus is, and engaging patients is really central to that.
Awesome. Paul?
So my name is Paul Bove, and I'm the social media lead for the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. Basically, most of you who are here probably know what the FDA does. We regulate medicines, foods, cosmetics, pet foods, and tobacco, and a number of other products. I work on the agency level, which means, excuse me, that everything that comes in as FDA as a whole is the information that I try to share. I'm not a scientist, I'm not a pharmacist, I'm not a doctor, I'm a communicator, and what I've been trying to do is ensure that patients and other stakeholders like medical professionals are better aware of what's going on in the world of the FDA and regulation that falls under our purview. Luckily for me, I have a ton of other people who are the experts that I mentioned, pharmacists and scientists that I could always go to when I have questions. And trust me, we get a lot of them. The public's interested in what we're doing, and we're trying to make sure that folks are getting better, more informed information and having an opportunity to provide feedback to us as an agency. We share basically everything. What's new coming out in the drug world? What's new for cosmetics or, again, pet foods? What's going on in the world of recalls? We have a lot of those, and we share information about that. Is there a drug recall? Is there a food recall? Different information that we're just trying to put out to make sure that the public and the health community and associations are better informed.
Awesome. Paul, wonderful. For those of you who don't usually have the opportunity to reach out and touch the FDA, you could shake Paul's hand later, and that will satisfy that. And we've got a whole bunch of questions for you. And just a quick housekeeping note here. If possible, maybe Steve or Joe could have a monitor of the tweets that come in and pass up some questions. It's just a little hard to see it from here. Got a bunch here that we had already kind of thought about because this is so important. Cecilia, I want to start with you here. Faster Cures, phenomenal organization. It's just been a real force for acceleration of understanding and then, the approval process for people who just desperately need it in their families. I was hoping you could just begin by talking a little bit about how Faster Cures and you specifically use social media to interact with your partners and with other stakeholders. Any tidbits there?
Sure. So Faster Cures, we don't have a specific constituency. And as I said earlier, we work across all the different sectors. So communications and really strategic engagement is so crucial to us being able to actually do what we need to do. And so to that end, we use social media in a very, it is part of our strategy. It's not just a tactic, if you will. And so when we look at social media, we look at it from a very passive point of view, where it's about information and knowledge sharing. We look at it from a very active point of view, in which it's a way to really engage across a variety of different organizations, from groups like the FDA to a variety of different disease research organizations that we work with on a daily basis. And on those kind of parallel tracks, you're really able to get a very good handle on public perception. And it gives you a pulse on exactly where the opportunities might be to be able to deliver a message, where the opportunities might be to translate a message from the patient community to the Hill, for example, or where you can actually look at some of the conversations happening online to really figure out how that translates into a mechanism to inform decision making throughout the course of research and development.
Interesting. So what you're saying is you use social media just as much as a monitoring device to listen as you use social media to push out.
Absolutely. And the listening part is just tremendous.
That's huge. That's huge. So you can sit on social media, you can, check out Twitter and Facebook and the others, and really just cull through what people are talking about, and then your organization, Faster Cures, responds accordingly.
Absolutely.
Wow.
And one of the ways we do, as far as the responding part, is also looking at, for example, a news article breaks. It's interesting to look at the news article for what it is, but it's interesting to also look at it and take a step back and see the reaction that people have to that news article. And that's where you start seeing what's, the validation of the online communities out there punctuates exactly what's real, what's not, and what's incredibly important.
Interesting. Paul, the FDA, does it do more listening or more talking on social media?
An amazing amount of listening, believe it or not. And I know a lot of people would probably say, oh, really, a regulatory agency within the government is listening? But yes, indeed, we do. Part of my day-to-day job is come in and look and see what people are talking about on Twitter or Facebook or different association groups that you look at online, and just see what's happening. What is the big conversation? Is there a new petition going out? Because trust me, a lot of them occur on sites like change.org you had showed. Is it something where people are doing a rally maybe? Whatever it is. Take a look, listen, and then from my perspective, I share it with leadership, because they're probably not looking at Twitter and they have other things to do. That's not their job to look at that. That's mine to look, see what's happening, and then inform leadership, potentially then write up a statement, put something in the press, put something on our website. There's different actions that can be done. But additionally, we are listening to see if people have questions. More and more we're doing that. In fact, on Facebook, we started a pilot, I think about 2 or 3 months ago, with CDER, which is the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. And basically, they started posting more information on our Facebook page. When people ask questions, a pharmacist from CDER gives me answers to people. So she's somebody who is an expert on the material and the subject, and then she'll send something, and then we respond to people and say, here's an answer to your question. It's not just here's a link to our website. We do have that as well. Here's a phone number. Here's an email address. Call somebody. If you continue having questions and you're still going to complain and you didn't take the opportunity, guess what? That was on you. We gave you the opportunity to call us and talk in person. So we're trying to provide people with more avenues to give better answers to them, and that's what we're hoping to accomplish more and more on social media, because we're putting the social aspect in it.
It's phenomenal. And having engaged with the social media for so many years, for now 15 years since we started Creaky Joints and Global Healthy Living Foundation, back in the day, we'd have to rent a car, drive out to somewhere, not in this area specifically, but we'd go out to Maryland, and we'd have to spend the day in a ballroom of some hotel, and the open public comment would, microphone would turn on and microphone would turn off, and that was that. Today, what you're saying is we are dramatically advanced, and this chorus of discussion and comments are being actively monitored and incorporated into your various day-to-day activities.
Nonstop.
Unbelievable. And the next question, though, that I have is along those lines, Paul. I think a lot of us here, organizations at least, sometimes are a little bit afraid of what we're going to put out. You know, we pause before we hit send or upload or tweet or whatever, because we're like, okay, this, you know, we want this to go right. We don't want this to go wrong. I don't think any of us are under the type of pressure that you are when it comes to what you can and can't say, and when you need to do it quickly,
Right.
how that goes through. And I'm just interested in what that process is like, and how stressful is your day?
The day can be stressful. I mean, I know my friends at times will joke and say, wow, you get paid to play on Facebook. Yay, good for you. Well, you know what? There is a lot more than just playing on Facebook. It is ensuring that we're putting out information correctly, and that means things like grammar. Guess what? You don't want to make mistakes and look like, you know, idiots when it comes to that.
Unless you want to be on the Colbert Report that night.
Which, yeah, you know, and that's happened to a number of my government colleagues. No, there is stress to it because you also want to share material in a timely fashion. That's a huge part of it. But you can't just jump the gun and send something out without having a discussion first. I know at times, Twitter especially, very, very quick. You want something immediately. Well, if you send out the wrong information, guess what? Now you've got a few thousand, many thousand people who potentially got dangerous information. When it comes to something like a recall, that can affect a brand. Let's say it's a name brand food product or something, and we send out the wrong information. Well, guess what? Their sales might take a hit. It directly affects things like stocks. That happens with drug companies as well. Additionally, we have to be careful in terms of not promoting a corporation, pharmaceutical typically, or a brand like a food brand or something like that. We have to be very generic in our terms of what we are telling people and the information that we're sharing. So luckily, again, there's a lot of experts in our office who can handle that material and help me with it. You know, I could write something quickly and say, this is what's going on right now. Let's get a statement, or at least a, hey, we heard you. We'll be back with you as soon as we can.
Wow. So just from, you know, I just want to articulate the extremes of the spectrum here. I put you on one extreme of just caution, because you need to be. And then the other extreme might be an organization that's with us today, for example, who unfortunately doesn't have the ability to have a full-time social media staffer, for example, but might have an intern because they're 20 and they know how to use social media. And so that's the other end of the spectrum, where you literally give the, you know, social media passwords and abilities to your intern and hope they use discretion, or at least put guidelines and a framework for the do's and don'ts for them to follow. And somewhere in between that spectrum, probably closer to the latter end, is NASA.
Right.
You know, I think of other government agencies that are very popular on Facebook and social media, and NASA is one of them. Can't really get into too much trouble with the selfie of a guy taking a spacewalk. Whereas I think you all have a real important job, but also not just the discretion, but the processes and the decision is very important. Let's switch gears here a little bit and talk about research specifically. I think a lot of the organizations here, especially in the last couple of years, the feedback we got was the importance that social media can play and the role it has in accelerating participation in research. And Cecilia, I'm interested in Faster Cures' perspective on what social media means for example, clinical trial recruitment and other research opportunities, and how you all have used it to leverage that.
Sure. So patient participation in research is absolutely critical. Without patients actually donating, you know, their tissues, sharing their electronic health records, or most importantly, really giving some of their time to be part of a clinical trial process, there won't be research, and we won't have the therapies that we absolutely need. So with that in mind, recruitment for clinical trials continue to be one of the kind of the thorniest issues when you look at research and development. We spend 30% of our time in the kind of clinical trial process trying to find the right patients, trying to get them into the right trials, and trying to keep them at the right trials. And so when you look at that, going back to what was just said earlier, social media as an engagement strategy, I think we're at a very exciting time in the medical research ecosystem, because on the one hand, you have patients who are talking to each other. You have a community of engaged kind of participants willing to kind of give their time given the right kind of mechanism. But on the other hand, we're still really trying to figure out where you plug that into kind of the research process. So one of the things that we look at Faster Cures is we work with disease research foundations. We have about 60 of them in our network, and we'll look at a variety of best practices. So you look at groups like the Michael J. Fox Foundation and how they're utilizing Fox Finder. You look at groups like the Melanoma Research Alliance and the Prostate Cancer Foundation, and it's kind of the spectrum of these diseases and how they engage with patients. And one thing kind of, if we took a step back to see what the takeaways are, it's really that using social media as a patient recruitment tool is still very much an art at this point. It has to be research driven. You have to know exactly what you're recruiting for and have the right tools in place, the due diligence to try to identify the right patients. It also has to really be a thoughtful strategy. To your point about, it's so easy to put out a 140 character tweet out there, but really being very strategic. I think, the saying goes, if I had more time, I would give you a shorter answer. I think with social media, it is even more important to make every character really, really work. And the third part is the dissemination aspect. So you've got to have, the research to back it up, the ability to kind of really be thoughtful, and the third one is to be very creative with the dissemination. And that's partly using the right messengers. And I think having trusted brokers actually deliver that message on social media as opposed to kind of the physician telling the patient what to do, I think that kind of paradigm is long gone. And so it's this way of how do you actually be part of the conversation, be relevant, and engage people in a process that, frankly, unless you're actually diagnosed with a disease for which there are very limited options, you're not really thinking about clinical trials. So it has to be very thoughtful, but also very persuasive in so many ways.
Wow, yeah, and we really are. I think that's well articulated. We're in a point now where it is as much an art as it is a science, and it's important. Now, Paul, from the FDA's perspective, social media and clinical research or clinical trials, is it a good thing? Is it something that's going to help propel us, or is it creating a lot of landmines that we have to be careful about? Or both?
Definitely say it's helping right now, and actually it's very timely what Cecilia just said. Last week, the director of our Office of Minority Health just made a video. It's Breast Cancer Awareness Month. We're doing a series of videos. This one happened to be about clinical trials and how to, or I should say the importance of getting minorities and other underrepresented groups to participate, because there is a shortage. There's a lot of people who don't go and participate in these different trials. So this example happens to be about breast cancer, but we're trying to provide stats and information to people and say, hey, these are available. Here's links. We link to clinical trials and tell people, look at this information, read what's out here, check out NIH's website, for example, or get that type of information.
Clinicaltrials.gov.
Absolutely.
Excuse me, yes, exactly, clinicaltrials.gov. So I think that we're able to share the information with folks who maybe wouldn't know. Maybe they just happen to be surfing around on Twitter and they see something about, clinical trials, well, I've got something going on with me, I want to talk to somebody. This is an opportunity. A lot of people maybe straight out wouldn't know that this is available if their doctor never mentioned it to them. So I think that there's a good opportunity to get more folks involved and to get different sets of people involved in these types of trials.
Wow. But the landmines, though, as I referenced, are there concerns, for example, that social media might encourage a discussion about clinical trials in ways that they really shouldn't be discussed, because they will then, the purpose of a clinical trial is to be done in as sterile and objective a way possible. But you start talking about your trial and you start talking about how you're doing, that might, then influence
the information on there. I don't know if indeed, I'm guessing there are disclosures that you're supposed to sign when you go to these types of things. Maybe that's incumbent on the people who are doing the research to say, look, we don't want to try to skew results. Let's clarify what you can and cannot say about it. Again, I'm speaking hypothetically,
Sure.
But I think that is a very important part. Don't go out and tweet about, this drug that you happen to try and did it work and all this, because indeed there could be hysteria that could happen, as we're seeing at times right now with Ebola and things. People are talking about drugs in that response or in that issue. well, what can be said, what shouldn't be said, and maybe somebody shouldn't say certain things if it comes to a clinical trial. And again, that could be the type of information that's shared with the person when they go to the trial. Don't go and tweet about it, and don't go share a big story on your blog yet, because we need to have results that are straight without being confused by these impressions that people might be sharing about them.
But overall, the benefits far outweigh the risks.
I think so. I would think
For
so.
lack of a better term here, of using social media for research.
I wanted to add to that point too. I think, in medical research is really designed to be as systematic a way as possible, right? It's a way to, you have the double-blind placebo trials to be able to contrast and compare what's actually working and what's not. And social media is by no means systematic. It is as random and as kind of organic as it can be. And so the medical research system, more power to Paul and his colleagues at the FDA for trying to really figure this out. You've got researchers who on the one hand really wanting a kind of a pristine package of clinical trial results, but then you have patients who are talking in communities in real time. And so how do we bridge that and still move research forward without kind of ruining what could be a really important package to present to the FDA? But then how do you, it's almost like you can't really stop patients from talking to each other, whether, one-on-one or in an online setting. Now the question is, how can we, the kind of the royal medical research community figure out what this means? How do we kind of respond to it so that it continues to be appropriate engagement and that it doesn't stand in the way of the progress we all want to see?
Amazing. Now, I want to talk a little bit about rare diseases, the super rare, the conditions that affect fewer than, I believe the definition is 100,000 people in a country of 300 million, so 0.000 something. Social media has been a godsend. This has been an absolute game changer for the way we can engage, we can reach, and then we can inform of the opportunities to be a part of this. You've seen this?
Absolutely. You look at communities like the Global Genes Project and the rare disease, coalitions out there. It is a very vibrant and robust community of people, patients, caregivers, families. You don't really have a rare disease patient. You have a rare disease family, you have a rare disease community for every one patient, even how, ultra rare it might be. And I think the rapid nature of the information sharing and the knowledge and the experiential sharing is tremendous, especially in the rare disease community. And it's one thing, if you look at, for example, and it's, the broader medical research community should pay attention to it. Think about a disease like progeria. It affects only a handful of kids and that's the kind of accelerated aging, and it affects a handful of kids. But there's tremendous research happening there because when we're looking at the progeria community, what we're really looking at is also kind of the broader aging community, and that's all of us. So rare disease might be ultra rare, but the lessons we learn from this community is totally applicable.
Amazing. Yeah. Paul, anything to add to that?
I don't know a ton about rare disease from my perspective. I know that we do handle it, and that's material that we share. In fact, I know there's the FDA's Orphan Drug Products group. That's what they handle, rare diseases. So one thing that I have seen is people basically building up a community of folks to talk about rare diseases on Twitter, as an example, straight out calling on FDA to impact change, to make changes and to research certain diseases that occur. And earlier this year, there were a couple that were going on. After a while, the material keeps on getting to the leadership at FDA. Sure enough, what happens, they respond and they start working with the people to try to get that particular disease looked into and more drugs approved for that particular case, because there are some times where there's case-by-case basis. And that was an example where it actually worked, by people using that, you said communities, it's families, everybody participating. So people are doing it, and yes, we are listening and hearing what people say about it. So from my perspective, it seems like it's working, and I, again, don't know a ton about it from myself, so I think that that's, my best example I can give on that.
I want to add to that point actually and give a huge nod to the FDA for its response and its partnership to the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, cystic fibrosis example.
CF, yeah.
So you have a product called Kalydeco that was approved about a year and a half or so ago. And although I'm not sure exactly how rare cystic fibrosis is, but it affects about 200,000 kids.
Rare enough.
Still rare enough. But the approval of Kalydeco and the response and the partnership that FDA has shown and the openness, the willingness has shown to kind of be a partner with the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation and Vertex, the biotech company that kind of submitted or that actually manufactured Kalydeco. It's one of those examples where when kind of all the different sectors come together, driven by patients and really kind of fueled by ultimately getting to the bottom line of getting to a cure, really amazing things can happen and change can actually happen.
Oh, this is a great question. Sarah, first wanted to say, loving this conversation. Thanks. How can patient organizations best help the FDA spread the word about research opportunities? It's a really important question.
I would say that you have the opportunity to actually speak to the Office of Health Constituency at FDA. They do the majority of work with our stakeholders and help promote different events that are going on and help let other people be aware that there's something that's happening. Just a really good example coming up is a big discussion about diabetes. We have somebody who happens to be the expert in our group about diabetes, and that's what she's going to be talking about. So what are we going to do? We're going to start sending out information actually tomorrow regarding this big meeting that's going on at the FDA.
So wait, tomorrow's news today?
A little bit, yeah. No, it's not.
Sorry. So then
it'll be coming out, but yeah, indeed, there's a meeting coming up, and there's tons of meetings at FDA. Start off by looking at the information on fda.gov. You can look up the information there, see what kind of meetings are happening. And it's not just here in the DC area. There's things that go on in other parts of the US. Work directly with those folks there if you're if you're a medical advocacy group of some kind that you can then talk to somebody. There are a ton of people that have the expertise on working with different stakeholders and seeing what kind of outreach can be done potentially, and then collectively, us and the other groups can help get the word out. Like I said, we've shared information in the past, and we're going to do it in the future. We put things out on Twitter, we've done things on LinkedIn, all these different sites where we go and help share information that's within the confines of what we work with. It's something that's available for different people. All you have to do is just talk, look up information. There's phone numbers and emails, I don't have them at the top of my head, but on fda.gov, just look up consumer information on there and you'll find it.
So just as a follow-up to that, we've been talking a little bit about clinical trials, clinical research and all that, but then there's the advisory committee meetings. Mm-hmm. They're kind of the open public comment periods that FDA affords the public to be a part of that process. And as I mentioned earlier, they're in some ballroom and some hotel and some place outside of DC. But do you, Paul, envision in the future that process embracing social media so it's no longer just kid with arthritis up there talking for a couple minutes about the importance of more arthritis medicines, but instead this massive universe that could weigh in some fashion?
I think in time. I don't think quite yet, but I think in time that is a possibility. The advisory committees are something that occur on a regular basis. Notes are typically put out afterwards so people can look at it after, but usually during the event, like you mentioned, there's a kid with arthritis perhaps who is the person who's speaking, or his family or something to that effect. I think it's going to take a little while because indeed, my understanding is that these advisory committees a lot of times do have a lot of impact on different things that might occur out there, including, this is an example somebody told me recently, the stock market. Oh, yeah. It in fact affects what's going to happen because if somebody makes a multi-billion-dollar drug perhaps, it's going to make big changes. A lot of different things are going to occur with that. Is that the biggest concern? No. I think, though, that these have been meetings that have occurred for a while they've just been done the way that they've been done, is what I guess I would say.
And just speaking from example, having participated in at least a dozen of them in my career, I often look around the room and think, why am I the only person here talking? There's about 45 million people living with this disease, and you got me up here? And this is my hope for social media, and yet again, to become a part of the process where we can engage people. And I think to all of your credit, I think that the fact is that the FDA doesn't need to be on social media if it doesn't want to be. I mean, it's just not necessary in the sense that you all can keep your head down on your desks and do your job, continue to do a good job. But you're opening the door up and you're incorporating this new technology, and I think the lesson there is slowly but surely, one step at a time. And to your credit, you are light years ahead of where I think most of us would have expected you to be, and you've embraced it fully, and that's a real key thing, and we're very proud of that.
And we don't want to keep our heads down. I mean, I like the conversation. I like telling people, hey, let's put out a comment, let's put out a statement about this. And based on the interaction and the questions that we're getting from healthcare providers, patients, consumers, we do have to be there. You know, I mean, just an example, 500,000 people following our recall Twitter feed to learn what's being recalled. We have a Flickr feed that's huge. I don't even know how many thousands of pictures of every single item that's recalled in the US. Every food, every drug, it's a picture of it so you can know exactly which one it is. If it's helping, then in my perspective, we need to be there. And I'm glad that we're doing some of it. Hopefully we can become stronger workers, is the right word? Collaborators, I guess, with the different groups that are needing this type of information.
So just to add to that mix, from the drug development process thus far, the latest user fee negotiations from 2 years ago allowed this patient-focused drug development initiative to actually start at the FDA. These are 20 disease-specific meetings throughout the course of 5 years, and we're halfway into it. And what we've seen, we've gone to every meeting. They've chosen 20 diseases of these to be, not because one disease is more important than the other, but really to be a sampling of how to engage patients from the perspective of really figuring out the benefit-risk ratio and how kind of those patient preferences can influence the drug development and specifically regulatory approval process. And I think even from that, although it's not FDA specifically putting it out there on social media, I think the signal that you're having these meetings, we've seen from the chronic fatigue community, the narcolepsy community, sickle cell, and others that have already gone through these meetings. They've deployed polls to really get kind of hundreds to thousands of patients' voices into the mix so that one person is not kind of providing just their own kind of context, but really being representative of that. And so these meetings, if you haven't seen it yet, please take a look at it because they provide such an excellent template for how to engage with the FDA. The questions are tremendous. It's really providing reviewers with a different set of tools to understand what patients are looking at. And ultimately, it's already, from what we've seen, it's already making an impact on decisions that are being made when you're reviewing a specific product. So I think there's so much that we can learn from this process as it's unfolding, but I also urge kind of the advocacy community not just to learn passively, but also to look at it. And we've seen groups that were not one of the 20, or disease organizations that were not one of the 20, galvanizing their communities and saying, we may not have been picked, but hey, FDA, we're going to provide you with the right information so that you can also use this to look at our product. And the Parents Project Muscular Dystrophy organization has done that for muscular dystrophy, provided FDA with kind of a package of patient information.
Wow, amazing. We have a couple minutes here, and I want to make sure we here in Washington at the summit have the opportunity to ask a question. Steve, Sarah, we got the mic down on the corner of the stage there, and it's hot. So if anybody has a question that they'd like to ask of the panel of Paul or Cecilia, now's your opportunity. However, I'm going to impose and ask that in the future, maybe we can come back and collect up some of the questions that I know will exist going forward here as a result of today, and then have a chance to respond. We'd greatly appreciate that if we could. And if there are questions, now is not the time to be shy. But while Steve is walking around, you could just lift your hand up to ask a question. Paul, you had said something earlier, and I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but is there a more important use of social media, immediate broadcast technologically, than for the subject of a recall or a major safety alert? Is there anything more important than that?
No, in my opinion, that's one of the most important things. And actually, the numbers bear witness to that. When we see how many people respond to a recall, it's amazing. Because a lot of times you can go through and you'll hear big name brands that, like, anybody would buy at their local Giant or whatever store you happen to live near. There's also regional products. It's amazing sometimes where you'll see maybe, I don't know, a cheese in Vermont, they happen to have a recall. We don't have it near us, but those folks do. That's a community that's being affected by this particular recall, and all of a sudden you see them galvanizing and saying, hey, check this out, this was on FDA's recall list. So from my perspective, when it helps potentially let people know exactly what the product was, yeah, I find that very important, and I'm glad that we do have that, and the fact that we have an image of every single one of these things, so there's no question.
The flicker, that's the cool part.
That is so helpful.
It's the UPC symbol, it's got the title of the product. I mean, it actually shows the picture of the product, so you don't say, was it this thing or that? No, it was this one right here. I could read that number, so.
And just a very quick anecdote, and really, I think the primary reason we want to restore our Facebook reach for everybody was because a while back, we used Facebook to get out an alert about a recall due to shards of glass in a particular medicine, and we threw out there. And that afternoon, we got an email from a woman who said she was flicking through her Facebook page, waiting to pick up her daughter, who was 8, from school with that lot and batch number in the front seat, waiting to go take it to the nurse to get injected. So if you don't get chills from that, and we don't appreciate social media and its raw power and importance, then it won't happen.
That's
here
immediacy.
Today. Yeah.
And hopefully, luckily, I assume that she didn't give the child
She avoided it because of that. And so, just to kind of recall the Change.org petition, and the reason we want to work with Facebook to get everybody's reach back in action is because of issues like that and many others that we can talk about here that would be important. We have a question here. If you could just introduce yourself to the panel.
Hi, this is Megan O'Boyle from Phelan-McDermott syndrome, and we are a rare syndrome. And although underdiagnosed, even with full diagnosis, we would still be rare. And we have a very active Facebook community, and we have a foundation Facebook page and then a closed family page. And I think there's been a few lessons in the past few years, and one is that families are too trusting of the word closed, and they don't realize that things can be cut and pasted and put out somewhere else. And I think that it's up to the advocacy groups to really, at their family conferences and on webinars, educate their families about social media, that it's not as private as they may think. And the other thing that we've learned is, as you all have indicated, rare disease families are very motivated to get things done, and they'll do anything that their foundation has asked them to do or the research community has asked them to do. So when we had a very small clinical trial going, the participants in the clinical trial would come home from the doctor's office and essentially blog onto Facebook how it went, if they thought they were on placebo, the adverse effects, and they weren't doing it to cause harm or upset the investigator or the pharmaceutical company. They were doing it because they knew that all the families that couldn't get on the clinical trial were just so curious. And my question or suggestion is, I think that the advocacy community really needs to get some education out there before clinical trials start. When people sign it in informed consent, they just say, where do I sign it? What's the date? They don't really pay attention to the disclosure. So I think we really need to make it clear that if you're in a clinical trial or your child or spouse is in a clinical trial, this is when it's okay to talk about it, and this is why you shouldn't talk about it until it's over.
That's great idea.
This parent meant no harm, and I don't think any harm was done. But then again, don't know what the 1,000 people who read her post thought. So I think, and rather than each of us one-off our own education, I think we should look for some sort of social media tutorial that we can give to our disease groups.
Paul, maybe you take that back, put it in the suggestion box at the FDA.
Certainly, I'll talk to the folks that handle these types of outreaches. I mean, that's a great idea because it's important
Standard
to let people know. Like you said, some people, I'm sure they sign, check that date, and that's it, without reading what else is on there. So certainly, and the other folks within the HHS might be able to help push the word a little bit better. So that's a great idea.
Great. We have a question over there. Super.
Hello, my name is Sandra Khalil. I started a grassroots organization called Crosslink Medical Resources about 3 years ago. I'm a patient advocate myself, and I devoted my life to serving patients. And that, I guess, someone would say, okay, what is a patient advocate, and what does that mean to an average individual that's a patient in a hospital? So for me, I kind of see it as like a nurse supports a doctor, I support the patient, and I support them just like a family member would. And I guess where my struggles are in terms of the digital media is that I'm so busy helping patients on the ground, doing the hands-on work, is that I don't really have time to do everything. And that means also the infrastructure, the organization, and a lot of the social media work. How do we reach out to people that want to help, to kind of support grassroots organization to do that full-time work, which is this digital advocacy, and get us off the ground, to get that visibility? A lot of some groups, patient groups, would use their patients, and they rely on their patients to kind of really blog and get that information out. But I think a lot of our patients are, they don't speak English, a lot of them are illiterate or dyslexic, and so they're not able to maybe are digital savvy, I guess. A lot of them are elderly, which don't have computers. So that's a challenged group, and so how do you kind of get the word out of the work you're doing and kind of get the help you need to get on your feet as a grassroots organization?
Cecilia?
Sure. Thank you so much for raising that, because that's such a real, set of challenges that you've just articulated. And I think part of it too is taking a step back and really, I know there's only so much time in the day, really trying to figure out how social media can actually advance a lot of the existing priorities, because that's part of it, is how can you use social media and leverage it to be a little bit more efficient in spreading the word or engaging big communities. But also it goes back to finding kind of the right advocates and the right messengers to be there with you, and having kind of the trusted brokers to be the folks who will be the tipping points, if you will. So it's very much, I think there's a very fine line between what social media is and what grassroots advocacy is. And I think social media, just like any other advocacy outreach program, it's a platform. And I think depending on what your ask is, how you're engaging your community and what you're asking them to do, that all can dictate what your digital health strategy might be. But I think it can't be separate from your organizational impetus.
And I'll just add one last thing. For every one patient dealing with any one specific condition, there's 2x, 5x, 10x family members that are touching and actively loving that particular patient. And when you zoom out, 10x, it makes your impact and makes your advocacy efforts that much more effective. So that's a great question, and thanks, Cecilia. One last question here for the both of you, and that's around patient-centered outcomes and the role that social media is going to play, if it isn't already, in terms of the FDA, for example, getting more information that might fall perhaps outside of the clinical trial realm, but still be super important to evaluate, for example, a drug's effectiveness or new endpoints or safety issues and so forth. And with the advancement of the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, of which we're very proud to be a part of as a principal investigator on some CER work, I'm interested in the FDA's perspective and how it is incorporating this, or plans to perhaps in the future, if anything is planned.
I think largely it's about listening to what people are saying. When I mentioned we monitor, we don't monitor in that big sense of government's watching you.
That's
we monitor,
the other guys.
Yes, that's their job. We listen to see if people are bringing up topics that are constant and something that's current. If it's the example you gave, the patient examples, if people are telling us about it, we do copy and paste things. It's pretty easy to get that information and say, look, here's what folks are talking about, here's what patients are talking about, let's compile this, put it together. Let's make sure that the information is collected so that we can use it and provide better answers to folks. Another example, it kind of similar but veers away a little bit. When people have the opportunity, or when the opportunities are presented to provide commentary, do so. There's a lot of times where there's an open comment period, perhaps on the Federal Register, and I know it's not exactly the same as what you're asking.
That's good.
Take the opportunity and go and put your comments down. We send out the links for pretty much everything that we have a draft guidance on. I make sure that that's out there a few times during the 60, 90, 120-day period. Go on there and put your comments. All of them are read, all of them are collected, all of them are looked at, and that's what makes the changes happen. If nobody provides answers, then people can't say, well, you know what, you guys didn't do anything. Well, you got the opportunity. You had 3 months, 4 months. Take those opportunities, or if you see other types of surveys for patients, share it with your folks if you need to and say, hey, we have an opportunity to provide answers here. They will look at it, and we do, and that's the best I can say in that regard. We have these tools, we share the links and the information. Give us the feedback. We're looking for it. We want it.
Amazing. Cecilia Ardaza from Faster Cures, Paul Bove from the Food and Drug Administration. We've just had really great insight today. We're really grateful for it. Turns out the FDA is listening, and more power to us, the doctors and providers and patients and caregivers and other organizations that rely on the work you all do. So we all have to be a part of it. On behalf of all of us, thank you very much for this phenomenal conversation. And we'll make sure that we have...
Thank you for having us.
This will be made available, of course, long into the future, and then you and your questions that haven't been asked today but will come to you in the future, if you tag them, #DHADV, then we're good to go.